case of Iran and the United States, but there is something new. Just moments ago, we've learned that Saudi oil tankers changed. They changed course. It means that they were trying to pass through the strait, through the Bab el Mandab Strait, but
Mhm.
it was avoided by Houthis or Yemenis, and
Yes.
they're just tightening the blockade on Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, the other problem for Saudi Arabia is that the Arba'in, as they call it in Shia Muslim, is the last day of commemoration of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein is over in Iraq.
Mhm.
It seems to me that they're gonna attack tonight, or by maybe in few hours, or 8 9 hours, we're gonna see a new attack on Saudi Arabia, because they're responding to latest attacks. Saudi Arabia, together with the United States, attacked them. If you remember the latest attack, the response they got from after the drone attack on Saudi Arabia. Here is what the situation we're in, and we have the problem between Iran and the United States. But before getting there, how do you find the situation with Saudi Arabia and these two active fronts that they're trying to manage?
Well, when you look at Saudi Arabia's increasing involvement in this conflict as a direct belligerent, but also as a peripheral belligerent in terms of when we talk about Yemen, because it's not only the greater conflict that the United States and Iran are embroiled in that has brought other nations into the conflict, but now specifically because of the conflict with Iran and the considerations that have been brought about because of the Strait of Hormuz and the importance now, the ever more importance of maintaining open waterways to the Strait of Bab el-Mandab, which the Houthis clearly understand is a leverage point. Saudi Arabia is now fully involved in this militarily, politically, economically. We saw about a week and a half ago, Saudi Arabia led the formation of an 11-nation alliance to attempt to address the Strait of Bab el-Mandab. And it's important here as we look at the, so much that's going on to understand, because I often reflect on the region and my time in the region, and that if you don't spend a lot of time looking at the map or have spent a lot of time in the region, it becomes very easy to kind of think in your mind where these nations are, who's doing what, and then looking at a map, you then realize, oh wow, like that's why nation X or nation Y is now directly involved in this more so, is because we'll look at the geography. So when you look at the map here, here's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is quite a large country that shares a border in the Red Sea, but also sharing a border in the Persian Gulf. So much like Iran has a great deal of its coastline in the Persian Gulf, which gives it a great deal of influence but importance, Saudi Arabia, in between that, has a large coastline in the Persian Gulf that it must protect and consider with this war. But then along in the Red Sea, all the way up from where the Suez Canal comes into the Red Sea and the Sinai Peninsula, all the way down to Yemen, and then pretty much all the way over to Oman. So for the first 4.5 months of this war, we're now at 157 days, so about 5 months and 7 days. When you look at the Saudi Arabia's participation or direct involvement thus far, it was somewhat passive. It was somewhat, well, we're just kind of here. Yeah, the U.S. launches some of their strikes and some of their jets take off, but we're really just kind of victims of geography. We're just here. And I think that Saudi Arabia now clearly understands that they cannot maintain that passive position. So direct involvement now, which means that if Saudi Arabia is going to address maintaining complete control, or at least attempt to have control over the Strait of Bab el-Mandab, which then guarantees the alternate pathway of energy that Saudi Arabia offers to this conflict, because if the Strait of Hormuz continues to go back and forth between control, closure, open, well, Saudi Arabia's offering to that is that, well, we have an alternative, but that alternative doesn't matter if they don't control the Strait of Bab el-Mandab, or at least can guarantee its free passage. So that's now drawn Saudi Arabia into direct conflict with the Houthis and Ansar Allah, not only directly, not only where Saudi Arabia has moved some of their border forces down to the border of Yemen.
It seems that we've lost
Am I
Anthony.
back?
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Can you hear me again, Nima?
I can hear you, Tony. I can hear you.
Yep.
Your picture, yeah, it's frozen.
Are you back? I can see you again.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
You're back.
Yeah, it just flashed out for a second. So down here along the border of Saudi Arabia and Yemen, near the straits, near the intercoastal waterways that kind of control access in and out of the Strait of Bab el-Mandab, you have where we know that Saudi Arabia is now focusing military forces. It's going to take a lot more. We're going to have to see a lot more escalation before Saudi Arabia is going to actually bring its conventional military forces into Yemen. I'm not saying that it's off the table. I'm saying that right now it's going to take a lot to get there. However, we're now seeing this expansion of proxy war or asymmetric war or war through others, where you now have Ansar Allah directly supported by Iran in direct conflict with Saudi Arabia in Yemen, mostly through conflict with the HTA, the Haramat Tribal Alliance. That pulls UAE further into it because that's in direct opposition to the STA, the Southern Tribal Coalition, STC. So when you see how this conflict in Yemen, if this is the kind of the area of responsibility, the area of operations that we're looking at, it's not only a conflict that's primarily here between the United States, Iran, and peripheral Gulf Coast nations. It's now directly here. And we also saw last week drone strikes against U.S. liquid natural gas ships, not in the Red Sea, but in the Suez Canal on the Mediterranean entry point. So whoever conducted those strikes, which I am confident was most likely the Houthis, because they have the range and the reach, and they could do that. Is that now that can not only pull further in Egypt, but also Mediterranean nations that rely on the passage through the Suez Canal into the Red Sea, rather than going around if you can't go through here, you're going around the entirety of Africa, which adds days, if not weeks, to that journey. So what I've always considered from the very beginning of this conflict is that when you initiate conflict, as the United States did, without a clear and achievable political end state, not a military end state. A military end state is to establish the conditions for the negotiated settlement. So when you start a war without a very clear political end state, not a menu of end states, not, well, it's the Iranian Navy, it's the Iranian missile capability, it's nuclear capability, it's regime change. Now it's the Strait of Hormuz. Well, now it's this. When you start a war unprovoked without a very clear end state, well, you have what's called mission creep. That mission creep has now spilled over to where it's directly involving other nations like Saudi Arabia and this 11-nation alliance. And more so now, we're seeing Iraq being drawn into this more directly because of Iraq continuing to be a base for Kurdish separatists that are conducting operations across the border into Western Iran. U.S. forces that are operating throughout the country, not only in Ali al-Salim and Baghdad and other locations where they can use strategic interceptors or strategic precision strike missiles, PSMs, but also in Erbil, where the United States maintains a very robust and capable inward-outward air line of communication, ALOC, GLOC, and special operations that conduct targeting. So we're now seeing that to your point, I do believe in the next period of darkness, we're going to see strikes against Iraq. We're going to see strikes against Saudi Arabia. Whether or not the United States is in a period of ceasefire or negotiation between Iran and the United States, that doesn't matter anymore. This conflict has grown beyond the belligerent conflict of the U.S. and Iran. It has now grown to where the peripheral have just as much at stake and are as directly involved than how the war started. And what I've continued to say that sometimes people will agree, or sometimes people will kind of think on it, and sometimes people will say, "Oh, you're crazy," is that this is how regional wars become world wars.
Mm.
And for anybody that thinks, well, a world war, we would have known it's a world war because world wars start as world war. World War I didn't start as a world war. World War II didn't start as a world war. The peripheral conflicts in Europe that grew and expanded beyond the original conflict that pulled in other nations and eventually the United States and others. This has all of the hallmark makings of that, to where we already have. Think about the direct nations and the nations that are directly involved in this shooting war. Not just the support, but the shooting war. We have Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Oman, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, Jordan, Israel, and obviously the United States.
And go to Ukraine, go to
Well,
Russia, go to whole Europe.
So now, when you talk about how the war has expanded past the direct, I'm shooting at you, you're shooting at me war, we now have other nations that are involved in, well, we're going to help with shooting at them, even though they not being able to reach us, we're still involved. And you got to take it up. You're right. To Turkey, to Ukraine, to Azerbaijan, because Iran does maintain a robust naval force in the Caspian Sea to ensure their lines of communication or their logistics with Russia. So when you consider now it's drawing that in, and China and Russia, and let's not forget from the very beginning, Pakistan. So when you consider you have this you have this situation where it wasn't stable to begin with. This conflict did not start out with clear intention, with clear justification, with either side saying, yep, that's justified, yep, this is justified. There, from the United States inception of this conflict on the 28th of February, 2026, there's been nothing but questions. Why? To what end? To achieve what? Peace deal? No peace deal? Now we're at war, now we're not. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So as you see now, when you have a mess and you continue to add more messy pieces to an already existing mess, it's like having a car accident in the middle of the freeway in a traffic jam that's already a traffic jam because of a car accident that happened a mile up the road. It just creates the condition for miscalculation, misinterpretation, peripheral wars that can spill into greater war. And I am confident that that is where we are right now as a world. We are on the precipice of World War III.
I think the point that you raised is so important, Tony, because I remember when the war in Ukraine started, it was all about little casualties here. Russia started the war with 100,000, 120 something like that thousand soldiers, and then you see the casualties going up, and right now the count, the number on the part of Ukrainian is somehow 2.5 million soldiers were killed during the war, something like that. And you see the same thing in Gaza when the war started. You look at Gaza today, there is no Gaza. They flattened the whole region. And it seems to me that as time goes by, we are getting numb. We are getting, somehow losing our sense of understanding how the war is expanding and is swallowing all of us into itself without perceiving that the world war is happening right now. What else can be called? Look at the population of Ukraine. It was 57 million people reduced to 20 million. How can you imagine that? What does that mean? I think that can happen in the West Asia as well. We are talking about two fronts right now in Saudi Arabia. They can, just imagine if they escalate, if they hit all these crucial and important facilities, oil facilities in the region. How is that going to influence the global economy, the global market? And is that going to help us to de-escalate? I don't think so. I don't know
Well,
what is
let's
your
look at
understanding of that.
To your first point. Yes, the world has grown accustomed to the normalization of this in this kind of growing conflict that doesn't just start with some momentous historic event that then indicates, oh, we're definitely in a world war now. I would argue going back to World War I with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, Archduke Ferdinand, when people say, "Oh, that's what started World War I," that was a historically significant event that you could draw back in a timeline to say, "Okay, that's where it started." But all of the belligerents, all of the entente, all of the alliances, all of the good versus bad, red team, blue team, all of that, all of those players were already fighting each other. That was just the event that said, okay, now we're on this side, you're on that side. Now it's clear. No more of this who's doing what. All of the same components of that are already here. And the world has grown numb to it over time, because think about the war with Ukraine. And when I remember, I was still active duty at the time when we were watching the daily intel briefs with great concern, because had Russia invaded Ukraine as they did, the unit that I was in, the 18th Airborne Corps, which is the Department of Defense's Joint Task Force for Global Response, we were on the hook to go. So we were watching that every day. We had set up an operations center for 24-hour monitoring of the situation and preparation. And by November, December of 2025, in anticipation of what Russia might do, we were already deploying U.S. soldiers forward into Poland and Ukraine to establish support, targeting support. So I think the world looks at this and they've grown numb. They've grown almost. It's become normalized. What's happening in Gaza has become normalized, because we're seeing it now happen in Lebanon without much more of a consideration of most people in the world just flipping through the news on to the next topic. But it's not because it stopped. It's still happening. It's because it's become normalized. And what we're seeing now over the course of this 5.5 months is that this conflict of, are we at war? Are we not at war? Okay, we're shooting at each other, so we're definitely at war. Okay, we're not shooting each other, so we're not at war anymore. And we've lost the understanding throughout history that just because you're not shooting missiles at each other doesn't mean you're still not involved in the same conflict or the same war, because you have not achieved any end state or political end state. And so I say world war based on the actual historic, accepted definition. Not what I think it is, not what I assume that it is, not what I see in movies or Call of Duty video game. What is the definition of a world war? Well, the definition accepted by historic scholars and war scholars is world war. A war that is a large international conflict involving most or all of the world's major powers, spanning multiple continents, and requiring total societal mobilization. As discussed in historical overviews, the term primarily was reserved for conflicts like World War I and later World War II. So, is this a large international conflict involving most or all of the world's major powers? Yes, the United States, Russia, China, Ukraine, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, have European powers like France and the United Kingdom gotten involved to some degree, a little bit, but they're certainly at the periphery of becoming more involved. Does it span multiple continents? It surely does. It spans the continent of Asia. It spans the continent of Africa. It spans the continent from Western Europe to the United States. Is it requiring total societal mobilization? Not of all nations. Not every nation has mobilized the entirety of their society, but Israel sure has. Iran sure has. The UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, they sure have. This is a total war for them. So based on global power participation, geographic spread, the involvement of those that are involved in the span of that conflict, how is this not a world war? I would offer anyone to argue the counterpoint to that. But based on the definition, based on what is happening now, we don't have a pathway to peace. This isn't almost over. This isn't close to the end to where we're going to, whew, that was close. This could have gotten worse. We're nowhere near the end. We're nowhere near a peace deal in sight. I think the best chance the United States and the world had to sit down, lock arms, and get busy on a real peace deal was the 14-point peace deal that's it would be foolish to even talk about that anymore. That's blown out of the water, literally. So I am concerned that we are at the precipice of, at the doorway of, and the door is open and we are stepping into a world war. Now, some may argue, well, we've been at world war since the Cold War, or this was always a world war. Well, okay, fine. Based on the definition of accepted principles throughout history and then in the assessment of conflict, I do believe that if we were to call World War III, we are at the doorway. That is what I believe based on what we see.